Round One is the first and only licensed equity crowdfunding platform in the Philippines, fully operated by the Eastern Securities and Development Corporation, or ESDC. Round One is the Philippines' newest online platform that matches companies to potential investors from all over the country. Pitch, promote, and reach out to potential funders, all through the easy-to-use interface. Brandon Leong is the business unit lead of Round One, also the director and vice president of operations at ESDC. So hello, Brandon. We're very happy and we're very honored to have you here to start a podcast.
Thanks, Johnny. Thank you very much for inviting me. Really glad to be here.
Yes, we're very excited to learn more about Round One, it being the first and only SEC licensed equity crowdfunding platform in the Philippines. So let's start with the first question. Ano nga ba ang Round One, or what is Round One?
Great question, Johnny. Round One, as you mentioned, is Philippines' first SEC licensed equity focused crowdfunding platform, and as you mentioned, owned and operated by a local stock brokerage here. We're not Philippines' first crowdfunding platform, but we are Philippines' first equity focused. So the sort of licensing process and our approval process with the SEC was a little different than the other platforms. So our platform is really what we wanted to be, is an end-to-end investment experience, a portal, a marketplace for entrepreneurs to raise capital and for investors to access these sort of alternative investments. We really wanted to also be a channel for the public to own shares in these kinds of companies, especially in the startup and SME space, as well as a digital business community and a financial ecosystem for SMEs as well.
Yeah, I can actually see the vision, basically connecting the startups and the MSME side who need funding, basically who need some financing, to those potential investors that have the money, that they have the money and they want to help, and then maybe they also get some portion of those profits that those businesses can earn. But in a nutshell, maybe because Round One is the first and only licensed equity crowdfunding platform. So what is equity crowdfunding? Can you just clarify this term for us first before we proceed further with our conversation?
So two things to break down there, equity and crowdfunding. So equity is really, unlike, let's say, debt, comparing it to debt. Equity is ownership in a company, right? Whether that be through shares or other instruments of ownership. And crowdfunding, of course, is reaching out to the crowd to do fundraising. If you really want to be technical, the stock exchange is a type of crowdfunding where listed companies reach out to a very broad investor audience and raise funds for, let's say, their IPO or their secondary market offering. The distinction with crowdfunding is that it's done on sort of a different level. Listed companies on the stock exchange raise potentially billions of pesos during one offering. In this space, the focus is on different kinds of ventures, but on a smaller scale. So in the Philippines, the rules for crowdfunding allow you to raise up to 50 million pesos a year. So because the scale is different, the requirements for using the platform are a little different, right? Instead of larger business plans, you may have a more pared down business plan. Instead of, multi-billion peso projects, you have smaller projects, but that also doesn't mean that these projects don't have a lot of potential to grow. It's just more of sort of this business stage consideration. The fundraising strategy for an early startup, for example, that's really the question here. So, this is certainly something that we have to really be appreciative of our regulators for, and being on point with innovation in the digital, in the digital space for finance. And that's opening up this kind of platform, this kind of venue for fundraising and expanding the opportunities for companies to do fundraising.
Yeah, this is actually very exciting. Because, for example, the PSC, the Philippine Stock Exchange, or basically the stock exchange, there are certain barriers for a business or for an MSME or for a startup to raise funds through that platform, and maybe through Round One, through equity crowdfunding, we can also extend the possible source of investment, source of funding to anyone. So can anyone be an investor in Round One? Can you just get some thoughts on this?
So Yeah, anyone can be an investor on the platform, foreign or local. There are two types of investors. One is called qualified or accredited investor. This is a designation that you'll see, I think, all over the world. And there's also sort of like other investors, right? Retail investors. Qualified investors are professional investors who do it as a matter of business. It also includes funds, government institution funds, professional investment funds as well, and then sort of everybody else, if you want to call it the crowd. One thing that's important to note is that when you want to start investing, you have to open up a investment account with our platform and with the intermediary. So it's kind of like opening up a bank account. A lot of that has to do with the reason being that money gets passed through the system. And so that kind of registration process is really required there. But there's no limits otherwise. Again, it's very similar to opening up a bank account or a stock brokerage account. I do need to mention that there are retail investor limits as well too. So if you aren't an accredited or qualified investor, you can only invest a certain amount of your annual income per year in any one of these companies that list with us.
I see, I see. And then about this equity crowdfunding, what's the form of these funds? I mean, I'm not really that sure with the terms, but like, are these securities? Are these in the form of like ownership in the form of like public stocks, public shares? So what's the form of this crowdfunding shares maybe that the investors can have for those businesses or for those startups or MSMEs?
And that's also a great question too, Johnny. The most basic form of ownership that I think a lot of business owners are familiar with is what's called common equity. So these are shares of the company that give you votes. So depending on how many shares you own, that sort of equates to how many votes you have, how much control you have over the company, for example, right? But there are also many different kinds of instruments. There are shares that don't have voting rights. There are shares that have a sort of preferential rights as well to either revenue from the company or other rights of shareholders. So these are all the different kinds of instruments that can be used and fall under the definition of securities when the crowdfunding rules talk about the ability to issue securities through this platform. Issue meaning I issue them out of my company to you, to in the investing public for them to purchase or acquire. There's also a type of instrument called a convertible note or convertible equity or hybrid debt is sometimes what it's called. And it takes the form of a loan that can either be paid back by the company or under the sort of preference of the investor exchanged into equity. So I think one thing that's nice to clarify about the types of instruments that can be used on this platform is they can come in all shapes and sizes. It really depends on the company's goals. For example, that sort of hybrid debt that we were talking about has a later sort of time frame in terms of how ownership changes. If the company looks like a year or two from now, that might be very important for the company and the investor. What if the company isn't doing as well as it thought it would? Maybe the investor wants to be paid back in full for the debt, or the company's doing very well and they want to convert it into actual ownership of the company. So those are some of the things that go into play in terms of the fundraiser's strategy, right? Thinking about what kind of instrument they want to use that helps them the best. That's a good compromise between expectations of investors, the risks of the business, and so on and so forth. What you'll see in other countries, though, that have crowdfunding platforms is a type of instrument called a safe agreement. And that's another topic altogether. I don't really want to get into it now because it's a long topic. But there's also the question of valuation as well. And this is sort of the fundamental question of when you're doing fundraising is how much is your company worth today, tomorrow, a year from now? And how do you sell ownership in your company with those things to consider? Again, very interesting topic and probably sort of outside of the scope of today's talk, but these are sort of the questions and considerations that go into fundraising and the kind of instrument that you use to fundraise. Sorry, that was a
Yeah,
super long.
it's really nice to know about these things, and actually, it's true that there are many instruments, there are many strategies that a startup or an MSB or a business can execute, can do to raise funds. And I'm happy that Rajon is actually like facilitating or basically actually helping how this startup or how this business can really raise those funds. So let's go to the startup. Let's go to how really can these startups benefit at round one. So I've heard that they can raise up to 50 million pesos, and it's actually, this way of getting financing can actually be done easily or something like that. It's much easier than most other ways. So can we know how startups can really benefit from what round one is providing for them?
Yeah, so there are a few things to talk about there. I think basically the ability to put your venture, your team, your business, your startup on a public stage and get a lot of audience members sort of, with eyeballs on what you're doing. It's also worth mentioning that one of the key exemptions that the SEC has granted fundraisers who use a crowdfunding platform is your ability to sort of publicly fundraise, right? You can't get on Facebook and say, hey, I have an investment offering, right? That sounds almost like a scam. And that happens so much that legitimate companies that want to fundraise get crowded out. They get kind of, they don't get taken seriously when they use public platforms to fundraise, right? In fact, they can't. The SEC wants you to register through them so that there's oversight, right? But instead of registering with the SEC, now that we have a crowdfunding platform, you can register through us. So we have the details, we can provide the oversight to the SEC, but that allows you to then get on Facebook and say, hey, I have an investment offering. I want you to be interested in it. I want you to take a look at it. But if you want to invest with me, please do it through the platform, right? And we do that so that we can protect investors, so that we can protect fundraisers, so that when an investor makes a investment in you, you never know what kind of investor that might be. And so we have a process, just like the bank does, just like other financial institutions does, to check the investor out a little bit, right? You don't want to know that you want to know if that investor is legit. On the other hand, we also hold any investment funds in our partner banks for the duration of a campaign, so that the investor has time to evaluate the fundraiser, to evaluate the venture and the investment before finally committing funds to them. So it's a nice compromise between, I want your money, I want to give you my money, but hey, let's study this first. Let's come to an agreement on how that can happen. So one, it's the public stage that I think is very important. Number two, it's the process of registering with us rather than the SEC, so we can help you expedite that. And number three, it's sort of the social media experience of the platform, right? Where you can post videos, you can interact with potential investors in the audience, you can validate your idea, right? You post up a venture and you see feedback almost in real time about what people think about the viability and the success of what you're trying to do.
Yeah, I'm just curious. Is there like a criteria for a startup or for a business or like can anyone upload, or can anyone basically just publish their maybe their pitch deck, their business plans, and then the public will just judge, or like is there also criteria being done, kumbaga i-check muna ni round one if this is plausible, like may first screening. So does that work like that way, or it's basically just public?
Yeah, so generally speaking, Johnny, there are no requirements necessarily for a company to pitch and create a campaign on the platform. There's just a few. Number one, it has to be a Philippine registered company if you want to use a Philippine crowdfunding platform. If you want to raise crowdfunding in the United States, I think they have the same requirements. If you want to do the same in Singapore. So if you want to use a local crowdfunding platform, you have to be a Philippine registered company, but you can also reach out to investors that are foreign. There's no restriction on who can invest. That's one. Number two, that's where it's a little fluid in terms of, do you have to be an actual company or not? There are ventures generally that don't have a company but have a great idea, great product. They may create a company later on and offer shares later on. This is something that investors want to know. Okay, sure, you don't have a company yet, but one of the plans or one of the ways you're going to use our funds is to set up a company and then offer ownership or do whatever you want. So right now we are making it a little, I would say, structured and formal, where we do want you to be a Philippine registered company. We do want you to be able to offer equity in the company at least somewhere down the line. But those are the only two basic requirements. So when it comes to how to get to the campaign stage, we like to break it down in three ways. So there's the compliance due diligence, legal due diligence, financial due diligence, which is just really high level on our part as the intermediary to, one, identify you're the company that you say you are. So, your company XYZ, okay, where's your SEC registration statement? Who are the owners of the company? Does it match up to what you said, right? You're the CEO, you're also a majority shareholder. Let's see that in your general information sheet, for example. So the legal due diligence process is, again, we're checking to see if you're allowed to offer some shares of the company to the public, right? Some companies don't allow that. You have to amend some of your company rules, your corporate rules, to be able to do that. So we do a checking to see if that's possible. We also want to see if you have other early stage investors previously that may have some effect on this stage crowdfunding investment, right? So we want to study that with you. So when investors come in, they know kind of what they're getting themselves into. Oh, these guys came in at a different valuation than me, so on and so forth. They have rights different than me that will affect me if this company grows, for example. And finally, the financial due diligence element is just checking to make sure that for the most part, you have all of the offering materials. So we have like a rough template of that, right? And it's things like, as you mentioned, your pitch deck, audited financial statements, maybe an industry analysis. If you have intellectual property, maybe the intellectual property registration. What's important there is that there is a basic sort of template for what an offering has. If you've ever invested in an IPO in the stock exchange, they come with a big fat 400-page book with all those kinds of materials in it that explain the nature of the business of the company, historical performance, so on and so forth. But in our way, there's so many different ideas and so many different companies. You don't have to necessarily limit yourself to that basic template. You can provide a more in-depth industry analysis than, let's say, another fundraiser. You can provide other means for us to understand your business better. You may offer rewards with your fundraising campaign. So if you invest in me, I'll give you a sample of my product, for example. So while there is something that all investors look for, there's also different ways to express the use value and the value proposition of your company too.
And all of this happen online, right? So can you just get a picture of like the workflow or basically the flow for someone who wants to raise funds? So like they register for an account at round one, and then they basically just start the campaign. They upload whatever requirements are needed, and then they design the campaign, and then an investor can like see that, and then they can go with the process of like assessment, evaluation. So is that how it works?
So we certainly sort of like stand on the shoulders of giants, if you want to say that. Crowdfunding has been around since 2007, even if it's early stage like Kickstarter, all the way to who you see now, like in the States, it's WeFunder, AngelList, for example. It's a platform where the different ventures and teams have their own presence on the site, like in the form of a profile that you can click through. Look at the intro to the business. If you like the premise, you can dig deeper into the different details of the campaign and the offering. If you don't like it, then go ahead and move on, right? So it's a database essentially of fundraisers and what they're trying to do. So from the investor experience, I log on, I say, hey, what's new today? What campaigns are being launched? What campaigns are being closed? Oh, I like this business. Let me know more. Oh, I want to ask the CEO something. Let me get on the discussion page of that company's profile and ask a question directly, right? Or maybe my question's already been answered and I can look and I can browse and I can search. From the issuer standpoint, as you said, Johnny, it's same in a way. You register also like your account on the platform because you're receiving money, right? So you have to open like a similar to a bank account type account. You publish all of those profile information, launch a campaign with the details that I talked about in the financial due diligence screening that we do, and see how it lands. See, investors click, they say, oh, this is interesting. Wow, you have great numbers. Wow, you're already revenue generating, or oh, wow, you have great plans. And that's the experience, and the interaction happens sort of in that discussion section right there.
I see. Amazing. I mean, it's actually very amazing. So it's like a marketplace. It's like a marketplace where people, where investors can shop among those startups and businesses that want to raise funds. And then, parang there's a social media aspect to it. Is that right? Like the matching aspect. Is that right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Jamie. Yeah.
And then, how about the campaign? So, I'm just curious. Can a startup launch many campaigns, or is it like one at a time?
So startup or SME or any company can launch as many campaigns as they want, so long as the aggregate amount, like the total amount of campaign, stays under 5 million. So you can do 1 million peso campaigns every month. Of course, like there's more fees, administrative fees on our end to do that. But you can do that as well. You can break up a 50 million peso fundraise into 3 or 4, or just do one. It's really, again, up to your business requirements, the business requirements of the company, their fundraising strategy and timelines as well.
Yeah, this is very exciting. Actually, how you mentioned, though, it's like AngelList or like WeFund or Kickstarter, WeFunder, basically Kickstarter. Na you post what you want to do, and the people who want to support you will give money possibly, and then they can also possibly earn when your project works. On the investor side, or retail investors and those professional institutional investors, aside from like choosing from the marketplace where can they invest, like they shop from those startups or from those MSMEs. So how really can they use the platform? I mean, is there also like they can shop and then they can view their portfolio, they can view how things are going, like the progress of those startups they have invested in. So how does round one work for them naman on those side?
That's a very good question too. You're sort of talking about sort of what the investor features are. So other than what I mentioned earlier about there being sort of the database, what's really important with the database and this idea behind the database is that every investor has different goals. Every investment fund has different, they're called mandates or objectives. There's some funds that only invest in green tech, for example. There's some funds that only invest in real estate. So what we want to do is take the Philippine ventures out there and help them match, right? Because you can pitch to 1,000 people and spend 1,000 days pitching to those people, but not all of them are, and you may have a great idea, but it's not what the investor is looking for at the time. So what we really want to do is cut out that, right? Let you reach 1,000 investors in a second and see how many of them say, hey, that's exactly my fund's mandate. That's exactly my own investment objectives, and then already expedite your ability to reach the people that you want, right? So that's the basic premise. It's a very fundamental sort of industry issue called suitability, right? Where you don't suggest investments that don't match what you want. You don't match a high risk investment to someone with a low risk appetite. That's just a basic example. So that's one of the value propositions we're putting forth. We want to expedite the ability for investors to express what they want and get what they want, and fundraisers to say, I have that, and give it to them. That's one. Number two, investors can use their own account and dashboard to watch list. For example, watch list potential ventures that are interesting. Oh, they don't have a campaign yet, but I'm really excited about this particular venture, and get a notification, for example, when the campaign launches. They can also manage their investment commitments. So let's say they have a total investment allocation of 10 million pesos. So they invest 1 million here, they commit 1 million here, they commit 1 million there, so on and so forth. And then they can manage, maybe they want to top up, maybe they want to add more to their commitment, reduce their commitments. They can also do that through the dashboard as well. The last thing to mention as well is that, when funds come in, they do it, they channel it through our company. And if they need their refunds, if they need to withdraw, we also manage that for them in a very timely way as well.
Well, I'm very excited. I want to use Round One. Is this a mobile app or a web app? I mean, I'm just curious how I can possibly use it in the future. I'm really excited, and I'm really seeing like I can just choose among the Philippine startups where I want to invest. And also, is there like, or maybe it's the startup's choice na, but parang meron a minimum. Is there a minimum like funding that an investor can give? Like meron bang how do you call this? Like minimum amount that an investor can choose to offer for a startup?
So We allow the fundraisers to set their minimum investment amount. So there's two things to ask yourself as a fundraiser, right? Do you want to make the minimum investment small and then potentially have a lot of investors? Or do you want to make it bigger so that you don't have so many investors, right? But that can also reduce the likelihood that you can get funded if you're talking to the crowd, right? So certainly, one of the things we want to avoid is like selling half a share to somebody for if the minimum amount is too small. So we work with the fundraisers to determine sort of what the maximum investment limit, minimum investment limit is. Because if you you don't set a maximum and then someone takes up the whole offering, maybe you don't want that either.
Yeah, yeah.
So this is something that we're exploring with fundraisers to see what works for them. And we say it's a crowdfunding platform. If you're not going to make the minimum amount bite-sizable, then why are you on a crowdfunding platform? So that's my sort of complicated answer to that.
Yeah. I get the point. Yeah. Another thing. Because like in the investment, in investing, like especially for professional investors, it's not just money usually that those investors can give to the startups. It's actually like they provide guidance, support, network. So also maybe one of the things that's most important with round one is how it builds the ecosystem, how it builds the network. So can you just ask, on round one's part, how really is round one like giving focus onto building this big network, this big ecosystem of those businesses who want to fundraise, and on the side of the investors, the advisors. So how does this all work behind round one's behind what round one is doing?
That's also a really great question, Johnny, because we are not building this ecosystem. What we're doing is reaching out to all of the great partners that have existed before us, who have built parts of the ecosystem, who have built their own ecosystems to a large degree, who have made that network and that connection. What we want to do with the platform is to be a glue, to make those connections stronger, to facilitate some of the, from the financial industry perspective, make those channels stronger, make them more efficient. Right. So the pillars of this ecosystem are, of course, government, educational institutions, incubators, accelerators, startup communities, SME federations, for example, or industry federations. And of course, investor groups and business groups, right? So when you talk about the government, I mean, first of all, we always have to be grateful to our regulators, the SEC, and their sort of all the hard work they did to make the framework. To say, okay, you can do this, you can't do that. If you do this, then, manage these requirements, right? And they're really doing it to protect investors. And that's very, very key. Protect, the trust that's in the system. Other than the SEC, the Board of Investments, the DTI, the DOST, all of these government agencies that are working all the time to give support to different parts of the ecosystem, right? The DOST has a certain focus, the DTI has a certain focus, but all of them want one thing. And it's to promote Philippine business, it's to grow our economy, it's to build wealth for our countrymen. So one thing the platform can do is be kind of like a private sector interface where, for instance, do you want to access BOI incentives? Do you want to access SEC incentives for your business? Use our portal as a way to understand what's out there. And then for the SEC to also communicate through the platform, through our marketing events, what's out there, and kind of be a glue between these different kinds of government agencies and their different missions and visions. Not do it for them, but facilitate getting the word out that the government really supports you, right? Really supports SMEs. When it comes to incubators and accelerators and other educational institutions, of course, these are hotbeds of creativity, hotbeds of thought, and dialogue about innovation, making things change, right? So what we want to do is, again, take what they're doing and give them a bigger stage for it, right? One thing that's really interesting that we've heard is, I think, your community is familiar with reverse pitching, right? Rather than you coming up with an idea and trying to say, hey, do you like my idea? Really listen to what the problems are out there and say, hey, I have a solution for that, and build your solution and your creativity around what's really the issues out there coming from industry insiders, right? So the ability to create a community for these educational sort of institutions, accelerators, and so on, I think is really important for what we're doing. We also want to do a few things, right, as financial professionals, and that's to help fundraisers understand what investors are looking for, help them speak the language of investors. For example, when they talk about financial metrics, when they talk about financial data, when they talk about valuation and things like ownership down the road, you know how to talk to them legibly. You know how to talk to them in a way that they understand, right? We really want to do that. There's a lot of financial literacy for investors, but what about the financial literacy for fundraisers? And that's something that we really want to work on. Of course, attached to education is ideas about good corporate governance. How do you run your company in a way that's transparent? Being accountable to investors and shareholders, being accountable to your stakeholders, being aware of the environment at large, the industry at large, society at large when you do business, right? So all these things that they're very high concept, but we really want to create something practical for fundraisers and startups and SMEs to understand. And finally, of course, when it talks about investor groups and business groups, they too are looking to invest in the Philippines, invest in each other, right? Filipinos investing in each other, giving back, but also growing with the growth of this country as well. So creating venues where investors can reach out to these startups, evaluate them in a way that matches them faster than you would if you were just doing like 1,000 private pitches, right? So really thank you. Thanks, Johnny, for asking that question, because we're really driving value for individual teams, individuals, but we really hope that what we're doing is also adding a lot of value to the community itself.
Yeah, it's really true. I think that the Philippine startup ecosystem is maturing. Actually, many communities, many ecosystems are growing individually, separately. But I think what Round One is doing, what Round One is contributing, is actually facilitating the matching, facilitating how these ecosystems, how these communities can connect to each other, especially on the finance side. So just for our last question, and maybe like a follow-up question to that, parang what really is the value that Round One is bringing as an equity crowdfunding platform? I mean, before this, like what's really the transformation that Round One is bringing into the table, into the Philippine startup ecosystem?
I think, in particular, the crowdfunding rules also, I think, Philippine crowdfunding rules also came with some other crowdfunding rules from other countries, like especially in ASEAN, right? There's a push for digital innovation in the financial industry in ASEAN in general, right? I mean, you have giants like Singapore in the space, Malaysia, Thailand, they're all rationalizing their rules, right? Because this is a very exciting place to be, like region-wise. Not just in terms of economic activity. I mean, of course, in terms of economic activity, but also in the crowdfunding space in particular, we are, I think, with the inclusion of China, I think the second biggest sort of crowdfunding industry in the world too. Why? Because there is a desire to, nurture the startup space here, nurture innovation here, and the economic drivers that are here as well. So what we want to do is be part of that story, right? To give foreign investments, foreign investor flows a portal into the Philippines and say, hey, this is what's exciting here. And it's just exciting as what's going on with our neighbors, right? Vietnam, Malaysia, Cambodia, so on and so forth. Everything that's great about the Philippines, we want to showcase to the world. So that's what we hope we can do. We're trying our best. It's also very high concept, but we're trying our best. We also want companies to understand that going IPO is perfectly attainable. The PSC has done so much work in terms of growing their listed companies, making the rules, some rules more accessible, opening up boards that allow sort of micro SME listings as well. I admittedly want to say that there's kind of a gap between, a startup or a company that's private and getting there, but it doesn't have to be difficult. So maybe crowdfunding can be kind of like a taste of what it's like to go public, right? Initial public offering. So, okay, this is what it's like. Hey, it's not so bad. Of course, when you go to the Philippine Stock Exchange, there are more requirements, there are more stringent rules, but you already have a sort of a taste of it. Or you might say, I don't need that. I like where I am. So you don't go there. But we really want to sort of give a track there. Hey, if you can make it through crowdfunding, The next step may be a bigger crowdfunding campaign. And eventually you'll have the revenue requirements, you'll have the capitalization requirements to do an IPO listing, right? Backtracking a little bit, one of the key parts, right, about going IPO is good corporate governance, disclosure and transparency. So connecting with your investors, investor relations, and you get a taste of that with crowdfunding before you make it to the big leagues, right? I guess we'd like to be kind of a stepping stone in that sense, but we're not going to pretend like we are right now. But we hope that, you know, if you go through the crowdfunding angle, if you do something public, then maybe, hey, I want to be listed, right? Because when you're listed, then you get an even bigger audience of investors. You get an international audience of professional investors who are, you know, investing in stock markets across the world, across the region. And it's really exciting. And more companies should really consider it as a goal going forward, right? I mean, there's benefits and, you know, there's pros and cons to doing something like that. But I really think that, you know, it's the journey is really beneficial to entrepreneurs, really beneficial to imagining yourself there one day. So that's one way we want to enrich the community and guide them maybe to aspire higher. Of course, promoting entrepreneurship, and you know that's what we're doing with entrap groups here in the Philippines, talking to startup communities as well, saying yes, be your own boss. It's really cool, but you know, no man is an island, no woman is an island. You need a good team. You need to be a conscientious manager. You need to be very careful with how you deploy your resources. This is all part of the entrepreneurship journey that you know, Filipinos really will benefit from. The more that there's support and encouragement to be business owners as well. And of course, getting Filipinos to invest in each other. We're all in this together. This is our home, this is our country, and we really need to support, you know, like our countrymen, our neighbors.
And maybe it's really time nga maybe not for an equity crowdfunding platform to be in the Philippines. I really like what you said, like empowering our entrepreneurs, because it's also kind of a barrier. We know that capital fundraising is a barrier in the Philippines right now. So I'm really glad that Round One is here to save the day, to provide another platform for empowering our startups and our MSMEs, and especially also actually empowering the investor side. Kasi parang Round One, through this initiative, through this platform, kumbaga allows everyone to play more fairly and more freely sa larger economy. Sa kumbaga, we invest in each other. If we want, we buy. We invest. If we want to do this project, we have more opportunities to raise capital, to raise funds. So I really think it's great. What Round One is doing and building. So your launch is actually next month. So can you just invite our listeners to the official launch of Round One, and maybe you can also invite our listeners to like and subscribe and follow to your social media channels and maybe visit your website.
Sure. Thanks, Johnny. So you can reach us out on FB and IG at Round One PH. So ROUND ONEPH. Our LinkedIn is Round One. We're still, about to launch our website too. So check us out, I think in about a month, where we also have issuers and fundraisers who are going to be part of the event, be talking about their business and talking about sort of, their challenges and their triumphs here in the Philippines. There's a lot of great stories there because, as you can imagine, some of them are actually COVID baby startups. Some of them are SMEs that had to pivot during that pandemic. And, I really hope that the launch serves as an inspiration to other entrepreneurs, other startups, people trying to make a difference in the Philippines, that, if they work hard, if they, keep at it and don't give up, they can really be successful as well.
I'm really excited. To seeing and to using Round One. Maybe paggising ko when I wake up in the morning, I just choose, what do I want to buy today? And I really want to see that for many Filipinos. And on the investor side and for the startup side, once they wake up, they decide they want to raise some funds. They just go to the platform and launch a campaign. So I'm really excited to see these opportunities for our Filipinos with what Round One is building. So thank you, Brandon, for this conversation. It's really very enlightening also on the side of crowdfunding, especially equity crowdfunding. Thank you.
You're welcome, Johnny. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you.